Thanks, Ashley. I appreciate it very much. You know, everybody who has normally come into Zoom into books, it's been me pushing my own books that are out there while I'm here. Of course, you can pick up a copy of Opposition Research at Headline Books or on Amazon or at stores near you. Just want to throw that in. But today, more importantly, getting together with an old friend of mine, somebody who has a new book that has just been released, New York Times bestselling author, the man who Richard Nixon once says, you might disagree with him, but he writes a hell of a piece. With his new book, A Cry from the Far Middle, P.J. O'Rourke. P.J., welcome to Zoom into Books.
Well, thank you, Rick, and it's really good to see you again. Rick and I go way back to the Washington of the 1980s, which we thought was pretty fraught at the time, but is beginning to look like the good old days now, isn't it?
So how are you surviving before we get into the book, how are you surviving the COVID routine?
Well, that's not hard. I live in rural New England, and you know, New Englanders have been socially distancing since they got off the Mayflower. They're pretty good at keeping everybody at arm's length, including each other. Only time they get closer than 6 feet together is when they're hanging witches in Salem. So it's been pretty quiet up here.
I just published an article about that. I think that actually COVID was social distancing was created by fly fishermen.
Yes.
Who want, you know, because when we're out there smoking cigars and whipping a San Juan fly back and forth, you know, no one is going to come within 6 feet of us anyway. So that's
especially not a trout.
That's right.
It's been my experience.
That is true. A Cry from the Far Middle. Now, I have to say before I start, one of the things you get to do as an author is sometimes you get to get advanced copies of books. I was able to get an advanced copy of A Cry from the Far Middle. I will tell you, this is the best book you have ever written.
Thank you.
And I've read them all, including the National Lampoon yearbook edition. From there forward, I've read them all. But where is this far middle of which you speak? No one seems to have found it yet, and yet you seem to be titling an entire book about it.
It's lonely out here as far as I can tell, you know, and yet at the same time, I think I'm not alone in feeling that we as the American people, we own the middle of the road, you know. Don't go passing me at 150 miles an hour on the left. Don't get over there spraying gravel with your pickup truck flying a big old Confederate flag out the back. I'm here in the middle, and I think a lot of us feel that way, but we've been, force of partisan politics has kind of pushed us over onto the berm or into the gutter, depending on the case.
You're not quite sure which is it yet. So when I saw the title, the one thing that I was worried about is that had our Lancelot of libertarianism given up on the libertarian idea, or is this a more of a state of mind that you're talking about, the far middle?
No, I don't think. I don't think I've changed my mind at all about libertarianism. I mean, libertarianism isn't really a political philosophy. It's more a point of view, and it's a moral point of view, I think. It's all about the liberty of the individual, the dignity of the individual, and the part that's always the hard sell, the responsibility of the individual. And so it's a way of looking at all politics, whether from the left or right or Republican or Democratic. It's a way of looking at it through the lens of asking the question, how does this speak to the liberty of the individual, the dignity of the individual, and the responsibility of the individual? So I don't think I've really changed at all about that. And I don't think the nation has fundamentally changed about this, but we have been pretty grossly led astray by the extremes of partisanship. And they're not even extremes about issues so much as they are extremes about personality and the way we present ourselves to the world, how we think about ourselves in the world. And I hate to see this going on.
You know, I'm writing a column that is actually going to be an actual review that will be published of A Cry from the Far Middle. And I opened the book with our hero, P.J. O'Rourke. It has become that guy at the Irish pub that sits at the end and talks about everything, talks about what is going on in the country. And I have to say, your opening line of the book somewhat does that, right? Your opening line being,
I don't remember.
what this country needs is less people telling us what this country needs.
Yes, yes.
And then, of course, you go on and tell us what we need.
Opening line of the book. I said, yeah, we'd be better off without so many political opinions, probably including my own. You know? I mean, because actually, when you think about it, politics takes up a very small part of life. I mean, it's important to you and me because it's kind of our hobby, and you know, we enjoy it. You know, the way we enjoy watching our favorite football team. But really, when it comes down to the most important decisions in life and the most important things in life, that you don't get voted into a marriage. You don't get voted into. You know, it's not a legislative matter how many children you have or what career you pursue or what makes you happy and what makes you sad. Oops, I just lost Rick's sound.
There we go. The difference between you and I on this whole idea of being the guy at the bar is when my buddies and I are drinking Jameson's, you know, or drinking Guinness with the sidecar of Jameson's. We're not right. I actually believe that as you go through your book, we find out that you are in fact right on many things, and I wanted to point out three of those. As we go through the book, I thought there were three places that you were just straight dead on, and one of the thing was the influence of literature on the changes in something. In particular, your visions of 1984 and how 1984 has not only come alive, but we've embraced it.
Yeah, I mean, 1984 is a scary book. When I first read it in high school, I thought, boy, that's what the commies want to do. Then later, when I was in college and I was a commie, I thought, that's what America, spelled with 3 Ks, that's what the man is trying to do. And then when I read it fully as a grown-up, I thought, well, I mean, this is an amazing indictment of totalitarianism. It's a terrifying book. I had forgotten how like truly tragic that book is, besides just scaring the bejesus out of it. But I also realized that telescreen that not only talks to us, but we have to talk back to it, and the revision of history and the control of every aspect of our lives by some sort of great political machine is something that rather than having it imposed on us by a dictatorship, we are imposing this on ourselves. We are, you know, with our laptops and our iPhones and our narrowly channeled 24/7 news cycle, with the echo chambers we choose to hear ourselves repeated in, we are imposing a sort of totalitarianship on ourselves, and I think that's something Orwell never foresaw.
You know, the echo chamber is a great point to be made, because when you and I were growing up, our parents and us, we would sit and we would watch television, and then we would watch news broadcast, and then we would come up with an opinion. Today we start out with opinion and we watch a news channel that somehow solidifies our own or gives a foundation to our own views, which is totally opposite to me. The other thing that I in this whole chapter about 1984, where you talk about Facebook and all of the different social media things, like, oh, I don't know, Zoom, you know, the things that people do and they watch. My son is the oldest son, Joshua, who you know is actually in the IT in IT as a living, and I can remember telling me years ago that this nation was not going to be ready for Facebook and Twitter and all of the things that happened, because people will have the courage to say things behind a keyboard that they would never say to somebody in public. And now that is actually generated into things people are saying in public. I mean, it's not only just behind a keyboard that people are saying it to your face.
It has really changed it has changed the nature of American political uh, uh, our whole culture. I mean, I'm thinking back to the street, middle class street in Toledo, Ohio, where I grew up. And I'm thinking about all the neighbors, which in those days people didn't move nearly as much as often as they do now. And you knew everybody up and down the street. And, uh, you know, as I go up and down that street, I really have no idea who was a Democrat and who was a Republican. I mean, I can kind of make a guess. My dad sold cars. It was a family car dealership, so we naturally tended to be Republican, like most small businessmen. It was a very small dealership. Most small businessmen do. But then the guy who lived next door on the other side, he worked at the Jeep factory, which was about 5 blocks from our house, and he was a union member. So I would probably guess he voted Democratic, but you know, I don't know. People didn't talk about this, and when they did talk about it, they talked about it in very polite and general terms. And you know, the old-fashioned legacy media, the old-fashioned mainstream, lamestream media takes a lot of grief, but one thing that was good about it was that because there were relatively few media outlets, each media outlet had to appeal to as many people as it possibly could. For one reason, advertisers would get on their case if they didn't. You know, I mean, the guy at the furniture store ad was going, I want to sell a couch to everybody. I don't want to just sell a couch to a Republican, sell a couch to Democrats. I want to sell a couch to everybody, even if they're communists or stuff. So you better watch yourself over there, Mr. Newspaper, because you're going to alienate half my customers. If you, and why would a furniture store endorse John F. Kennedy or Richard Nixon anyway? I mean, what kind of sense does that make? Maybe if you sold rocking chairs, I suppose that you could, the famous Kennedy rocking chair for those younger viewers out there.
You have to explain some of the references here, PJ.
Yeah, I know.
We have different audiences than we used to have.
Yeah. It's like button hook pass. You know, everybody knows what a button hook pass is, but nobody knows what a button hook is anymore. It's the yeah, and your son was absolutely right. We weren't ready for the way that people could anonymously or semi-anonymously, or at least without supervision, just pour their hearts out. My chapter on the internet is called "Whose Bright Idea Was It to Make Sure That Every Idiot Was in Touch with Every Other Idiot?" You know, I suppose we shouldn't be talking this way while we're on the internet, but nonetheless, I think everybody knows what I mean. And it's just, you know, no matter how wrong you are about something, you can find a large and enthusiastic group of people that are even wronger.
You know, with all the hearings they're having on the influence in that Russia and other countries had in our last election, what I'd really like to have is a hearing on people who were influenced by Facebook and Twitter on who they should vote for. I want to get those people before a panel and say, what were you thinking? What kind of an idiot decides who they're going to vote for based upon something they see on Facebook?
Yeah, I mean, on what, you know, we thought of when it was started as being basically a sort of a shared bulletin board or a sort of shared scrapbook that would be mostly about, you know, news for family and friends and so on.
And
very quickly,
the very important cat videos.
Yeah, and the very important cat videos. Yeah, it quickly degenerated into a way of everybody. This is, you know, an interesting thing, and I cover this a bit in the book about this, is that we had this idea starting in the 50s anyway, certainly prevalent in the 60s and 70s, about communication. If people could just communicate with each other, you know, if mothers and fathers could communicate with their kids, it would close the generation gap. If blacks and whites could communicate with each other, it would close the racial divide. If the United States and the USSR could just communicate, it would put an end to the Cold War. And you know, the great we thought of as the advocate of this was the media critic Marshall McLuhan, the guy who invented the concept of a global village, the television. Television was the big thing then, it's being long before computers. television would create a global village. And I'd heard about the McLuhan not being so hot on this. So actually I read some McLuhan, and it turned out he was really trying to warn us about this. And I found an interview that had taken place on radio in Canada with him, where the interviewer said, well, Dr. McLuhan, you know, you said we were going to have a global village. And McLuhan goes, well, I never said the global villagers would like each other. He said, very frequently when we get closer to people, when we get closer to strangers, we get more angry at them, more upset by them, more worried about them than we were when we saw them from a distance.
I also enjoyed in this book your detailed discussion of the fall of classic liberalism as being something that has impaired actually conservatism.
Yeah, I mean, I'm particularly worried about conservatism in this case because I'm a libertarian, but I'm a sort of conservative libertarian. But of course, it's been very, very damaging to the capital L liberals too. By classic liberalism, we're talking about, you know, the ideas of liberty that arose during the 18th and 19th century that were based on concept of equality before the law, of democratic government with various checks and balances, with minimal interference in the free market, with minimal interference in international free trade. These ideas started to develop, you know, with Hume and with Adam Smith in the 18th century, of course, with Jefferson, and various things. And they came to flower in the 19th century, and where they took root in the developed democracies, the world that they produced was really, really a wonderful one. I mean, I don't think that the world has ever experienced better places to live than modern classical liberal democracies, the way we have here in the United States, the way they've got in Canada and Australia, the way they've got in the better parts of Europe. These are the places to live. And are we going to start throwing those philosophies out the window?
You're a great believer in free speech, but you actually believe free speech should not only be allowed, but also constitutional, but also should be mandatory.
Yeah, I did make that point in one chapter. I said, really, if we're going to be as loud and abrasive about our political views as we have been being, well, then let's go all the way, you know? I mean, so I want you to wear the I hate foreigners sign around your neck, big I hate foreigners sign, and see how you get treated by various service personnel around the United States and many other employees, how you get treated by the Uber driver and the cab driver, how you get treated by the hotel maid and the waitress. How you get treated by your own immigrant grandmother could be an interesting question with an I hate foreigners sign around your neck, you know. Or, you know, when you next go for a medical checkup, maybe you should take a, you know, magic marker and write across your stomach, I want the government to run your doctor's office and see what kind of like checkup. As I said, the result could be, I was using Elizabeth Warren as the example there, and I was going to say the result might be, well, Mrs. Warren, it looks like we're going to have to take out your other appendix.
The third thing that caught me, just because I found it funny and humorous to read, I love the chapter on the 1960s drug culture. Now, I'm too young to be part of the 1960s drug culture, but I wanted to see how it compared with 70s and 80s. So I find that we all came up with the one very same conclusion, was that when we all got older and suddenly listened to a Grateful Dead concert, we were surprised that they really weren't that good.
Yeah, that was the old joke about what does the Grateful Dead fan say when he runs out of pot? Gosh, what a blankety blank band this is. Yeah, drugs turned out to be. I was trying to come up with because you know, we have a big drug problem in the United States, a serious opioid problem, a serious problem with drug gangs and crime and so on. So I was trying to figure out what we could learn from the 60s, and basically what I learned was that we can learn nothing whatsoever from the 60s drug experience. That you know, we had a sort of pious attitude toward, idealistic attitude toward drug taking. We actually thought we could create a better society by taking drugs, which is like thinking you can create like a better automobile by driving it off a bridge. Yeah, we were just so completely wrong. But I got to say that that said, of our various wars, our various unsuccessful wars, that we're forever metaphorically fighting a war against poverty and so on, the war against drugs has been a real disaster. You can't help but wonder how much would it be worse to just have let them run wild? I mean, obviously that would have had terrible costs. But
you wrote about it in 1991 on a book that is suddenly not showing up on the screen, but Parliament of Whores, you wrote about it then.
I did. I went on police ride-alongs and so on, and the you know, the police were happy to bust the drug dealers because, as they pointed out, these are not nice people anyway. But they were just, you know, they just shrugged hopelessly at the whole idea of getting people to stop taking drugs, without which, of course, there'd be no drug dealers.
You know, I just held up and it didn't show very well. I don't think it's going to up in there. It just goes into oblivion again.
Yeah,
but your 1991 book, it actually did make it into the top 10. I think it made it up to, did it make it to number, made it in top 5, I know. I think you were in single digits, if not number 1.
Yeah.
Bestseller of Parliament of Whores. Now, I said this new book is your best book. This book is my favorite book because I'm in it.
Yes.
So
not only are you in it, I owe a lot of it to you. You were the guy who really showed me everything that's got to do in that book with Congress, and lots that's got to do with the way Washington works. I owed to you when you were working for Jim Bunning, the wonderful late Jim Bunning. Back when he was
for those who have read the book, by the way, PJ came in and worked in our office for a week at Jim Bunning's office. We called him at the time our AARP intern.
Yes.
That came in and went to hearings with Jim. And as those of you who know Jim know, he wasn't very kind to press, but took a liking to PJ, and PJ got to shadow him for a week, and as we went through Congress. I guess that's my question is, that was, I mean, that book was the whoop that summer. When that book came out, man, everybody wanted a copy of Parliament of Whores. I was actually getting phone calls because my name was in the book of people that I knew going, is that you that's in the book? I mean, this was like the book to be out that summer. Could you write that book today, PJ?
Probably not.
Or how would that book be different today?
Probably not. What's different is the level of anger. Now, the level of partisanship, we talk a lot about how partisan politics have become. The level of partisanship was very, very high in the late 80s when I was writing that, late, 88, 89, 90 when I was writing that book. I guess it was done by 90 because I was, because I actually wrote the preface to that while I was off covering the Gulf War. When I was in Saudi Arabia, lovely place. But the level of personal anger that we see now did not exist in Washington. It was a competition. There were heated words. There were personal animosities, but they were generally, but there was as often within one party as there were between two parties. There was a code of behavior that made it possible for me to talk. I mean, besides Jim Bunning, who I admired enormously and with whom I agreed on all the issues, I was also close friends with Pat Schroeder, with whom I disagreed about all the issues. But it was not a it was more of a boxing match with strict rules and referees than a professional wrestling match, which is what it's like now, where people.
Marcus and Queensberry rules applied.
Yes, yes, they did. They did. Don't you think so? I mean, you were You were more
I
familiar
think
with
so
it
because
than
I mean, I remember us chatting about at the time when you finished with one of the days we went over to the Capitol Hill Club, which was the Republican club in the
Yeah,
basement of the Republican Party, and there was a former Democratic congressman down there playing piano.
that's right.
That you sit back and you say it was a different time that people actually did. There was some collegiality after the event.
Right.
You know,
That doesn't mean the event itself wasn't hotly contested. And that's my feeling about current politics, and something I try and get across in the book is that I don't want us to quit arguing about issues. The issues merit argument, and they merit strong argument. They may even merit anger and indignation within bounds of civilization. Let's not forget that we're a family. We're a big, quarrelsome, contentious family, but we all know how family fights go. It starts out with like, should we slipcover the Davenport? And it ends up with, and I remember that time in 1991 when you flirted with that girl at that party and you leave wet towels on the bed, and, what we call the kitchen sink argument. And that's what we've sunk into now, is we're throwing the kitchen sink at each other. We should stop that.
I think that's a good segue into my final point, and then I think we have a few questions here. We should be having these cigars, by the way, at a racetrack with some bourbons right now, if I remember. Still smoking the little cigarillos there, I see.
Yes, yeah. The one thing I really do like about virtual book tour is that I get to smoke in public for the first time since, I don't know, about 1990.
The final thing that is very interesting about your book is that you finished it and sent it to your publisher in December of last year.
I did.
Pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID.
Pre-BLM movement.
Yeah.
Everything before it happened.
Pre-Antifa. And then, so I'm writing this book about what I think is like American politics having reached about as low a depth as I could remember in my lifetime. Let us not forget, when we talk about how divided America was, that there was this little thing called 1861 where we were a whole lot more divided than we are now. So let's keep it in perspective. But nonetheless, I was thinking, boy, the state of American politics has reached a bottom. Well, maybe we saw it in the 60s, but it's reached it's been a long time since things were this bad, and they really can't get much worse. So it was written with a note of hope, and then things got worse.
And they got in, and you wrote I think the thing that interested me both in this book and that got me interested in wanting to get you on the air and talk about it was actually the prequel that you wrote to the book following all of this happening. And I love the closing line of the prequel to the book that this may all lead us to our own nature and devices, and you don't necessarily mean that in a good way.
Right. I was trying to make the point that we should emerge from all these stresses and difficulties in this very tough time that we're having, in health-wise and economics and politically. Maybe we should all emerge with a more sort of pragmatic, straightforward, simple idea of what government is there for and what it can and can't do, or maybe trapped in our houses, stewing with all our grievances and upsetting ourselves even more with nobody to talk to but ourselves. Maybe we just get angrier and angrier, because that's often the way human nature works. And I ended by saying, I'm betting on human nature, and I don't mean it in a good way.
Joe Burkhat, by the way, as we reach the end of our half hour with you, PJ, great to be here with you. But Joe Burkhat had sent a note in here and said, how come we never see people ranting on Facebook about their responsibilities? They only it's my right, I have the right to do this, I have the right to do that. They never rant on Facebook about their responsibilities. Do we need a new Facebook for that? I mean, should we
Yeah, that would be the guilt book, wouldn't it? You know, I mean, because you know, we're all guilty to one extent or another of not meeting our responsibilities, and nobody wants to brag about that. I guess. Although why we want to brag about our anger is puzzles me every bit as much. Um, yeah, so maybe we should start a guilt book.
Guilt book, and maybe we'll get somebody that doesn't dress like a fourth grader who's dressing himself for the first time to run it. Mark Zuckerberg. Love that line from the book. Hey, for the folks that we got into some serious discussions here. I got to tell you, for the P.J. O'Rourke fans, there are the classic P.J. O'Rourke lines in this. Mark Zuckerberg looking like dresses himself, looks like someone who is a preschooler who has been allowed to dress himself for the first. Classic P.J. O'Rourke line. Every chapter is filled with them, but again, what you're going to be finding yourself doing with this book is, and we talked about this before we went on air. Ashley just came on here to join us. Wave, Ashley, say hi.
Hi.
I think one of the things that I like getting the paperback book. I don't like getting the other book. I've read, because of the galley came in an electronic version. I'm going to go out. I love dog-earing the pages. I love highlighting things, and I love writing notes in the margins as I go along. I will tell you, you will run out of ink with this book by P.J. O'Rourke, A Cry from the Far Middle, Dispatches from a Divided Land. PJ, without a doubt, I again go to this is, I think, one of the best book you have ever written. Not my favorite. I'm in the favorite book, but this is, I think, the best thing that you've written. I'm looking forward to seeing this one climb the top. We got to Joel's question a minute ago. Ashley, do we have any other questions coming in?
We do have one more question related to the current COVID-19 pandemic. You know, you had said earlier that you're in New England, and we have a few questions about if the pandemic has affected your writing, if you've been able to work and be creative during this time, and how that's affected your projects.
Well, I think when what you do is pretty solitary in the first place, a little extra solitariness, it might add a little layer of sort of anxiety and angst. And, you know, I think we're all a little depressed about not getting to see our friends and family as much. I wouldn't say it really affected my work, but I think it has kind of affected my attitude. We had something very sad in our family. My father-in-law, a wonderful guy, retired FBI agent, career FBI agent, and had been head of corporate security for General Electric after he retired from the FBI. Wonderful guy. He died. He was not of COVID, and he was 95 years old, and he had lived a full life. World War II veteran, forward artillery observer with patent in Europe. And he was, you know, a very fortunate man, happily married for almost 60 years. And so, you know, it was a passing, you know, that we would accept. What we couldn't do, though, as his health was failing, we couldn't be with him. And then we couldn't be with my mother-in-law, who, all mother-in-law jokes to the contrary, I love dearly. And she is in retirement home, and retirement home is under terrific restrictions. We haven't really been able to, I mean, we've been able more recently to see her, but we can't really spend time with her. We can't go visit her. The kids can't go visit her. And of course, it's a very tough time for her, and she's 90. So it's this kind of thing, I think, that weighs on all of us. Doesn't weigh much on me professionally. I'm enormously lucky in that respect, but I think we all bear up under that extra burden of separation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's certainly something that a lot of families are, I'm sure, dealing with.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're not the only family that's been through that.
How do you write, PJ? When I know a lot of your books end up being collections of different stories, but you gather them around a theme. How do you, when you're starting out with the various articles, do you have in mind, was Cry from the Far Middle the original thought of all these different articles that you had published?
No, actually, it wasn't. I had been writing among various things that I do is I'm I'm the editor-in-chief of a free web magazine called American Consequences, which is
which
about,
I am a subscriber. Yeah.
oh, and I hope you enjoy it. And it's about political economy, really. It's about economics and finance and the effect that politics has or fails to have on those things. It's because it's kind of private geeky interest of my own, but we've been, we reach out to a lot. I think we've got about 300,000 people out there reading that. So I had been writing regularly for every month, at least a couple pieces for American Consequences. And after a couple of years of doing that, I realized that they had sort of unintended by me, they had taken a certain shape and form. And that shape and form was about the divisions in America, the fundamental divisions and how they become exaggerated, increasingly exaggerated, especially in the wake of the Trump campaign and the Trump victory in 2016. And of course, that just hasn't gone away. We're right in the middle of that still.
Any other questions, Ashley? Otherwise, we'll let PJ get back to his cigar, and maybe you have a bourbon sitting back there that you can finish up your tour of the internet here with us. As we've
well, I don't know if I'll have a bourbon this early in the day, but I might have a nap.
how do we get to be the same age as all those old people? That's what I want to know.
I don't know. Right?
Oh, well,
Once again, thank you for being with us, PJ O'Rourke, New York Times bestselling author. I'm telling you, you have got to get A Cry from the Far Middle. It is without a doubt, again, I think the best thing you've ever written. Ashley, I know you have a couple of websites that we're going to be using to promote these. One especially looks to use to indie bookstores. Who is that we where can we send them for these books?
So we'll be posting some links here actually on the videos, so you can just get a direct link to it. And then, so again, you can just continue to watch the replay of this one on Facebook or on the Zoom Into Books YouTube channel. So like I said, we'll post all of the links where you can buy these books and learn more about PJ and more about Rick and more about the Zoom Into Books program.
Great, thank you very much, PJ. I think this one is going to jump up on the list as well. Best of luck to you, and it's great to see you again, pal.
Oh, it's really great to see you, and thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'll see you all guys later.